The wait is over. It's time for the America's Cup match. Emirates Team New Zealand defend the old mug against Luna Rossa Prada Pirelli. It's Jimmy Spittle up against Peter Burling once again as the two teams go head to head in sport's oldest international trophy. This is your America's Cup show, Beyond the Cup. It's a best of 13 race series beginning on Wednesday, a lay day Thursday, then 2 races each day until one team reaches 7 wins. Live commentary, of course, on News Talk ZB, Gold AM and iHeart Radio, with, of course, Peter Montgomery, the doyen of sailing commentary. We're coming to you from the library at the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron with some friends of the show. Freddie Carr from INEOS Team UK, Paul Goodison from American Magic, and AUT sailing professor Mark Orams as we break down the strengths and the weaknesses of the two teams. Well, Paul Goodison, you are a 6-time world champion and Olympic gold medalist. You know all about the pressure of top international sailing. How do you think these two teams will be feeling on the eve of the America's Cup match?
I think they're going to be excited. Like, we're all natural competitors. We all love to go racing. I think there's going to be a lot of excitement along the teams. I think there's going to be some nerves as well. There's probably some younger guys in both teams who haven't competed on this level before, so I'm sure there'll be a little bit of nerves, but it's down to the key players who've been there and done it before just to settle the ship and to really focus on what's coming ahead.
And Freddie, you're a veteran of numerous cup campaigns. What team is under more pressure to perform?
Well, good question. Whenever you land in New Zealand and you see how much this country loves sailing and the America's Cup specifically, you can't help but think the Kiwis must be feeling a little bit of pressure. They've literally got a team of 5 million behind them, following them, wishing them all the way. I kind of feel like Prada's really proved a point already by reaching the match, so in my head maybe the pressure's off Prada a little bit, and the pressure could be on Pete and the boys.
Mark Orams, both teams have been through the measurement stage now. Can you just explain the different configurations? Are they very different in terms of the way the two boats are set up?
Yeah, even to the naked eye, both boats are very different from one another. And of course there's a whole bunch of things that we can't see that will be also different. The most noticeable thing to the naked eye is just the hull forms. The shape of the hulls are quite different. Te Rahutai is the most radical. Luna Rossa, by all accounts, in their first version of the new AC75 yacht, had a really good platform, and so not surprisingly the second yacht that they developed that they'll be racing in the match is a refinement and an evolution from what they did in their first boat. In contrast, Emirates Team New Zealand's Te Rahutai is vastly different than Te Aihe, their first boat. And then you add in the differences in the foil packages as well, and you can see that the design teams have come up with quite different approaches to try and solve the puzzle of creating the fastest all-round boat.
Goody, Team New Zealand have kept a very low profile over the last few months, just quietly going about their business. Do you think this would have been a deliberate strategy?
Yeah, for sure. I think just going along, you've got your goals, you've got your milestones along the way, and you're just slowly ticking away, improving the performance. They're obviously in a really strong position. They can keep checking in on all the data. They know how fast the other boats are going during the racing. They keep looking back at that, and they have a really good comparison for the times they're pulling and the way they're performing. So just by looking at the other boats, looking at themselves, they've got a good measure of where they are right now.
Freddie, some of the sailors from INEOS Team UK and American Magic have gone home. Others, like yourselves, have stayed on to watch the match. What is the buzz like around the sailing community in Auckland at the moment?
I mean, everyone's just really excited, you know. I think we had a good Challenger series. It was a real shame what happened to Paul and his guys for not to get the full schedule of racing in, but I think we saw how good these boats are to race. I think maybe not so much in the Prada Cup final with us versus Luna Rossa, but there were glimpses of just how close this racing is going to be, and I expect to see that going forwards into the match. I think the pre-starts are going to be full on, and as we saw the evolution of the pre-starts throughout the World Series into the Christmas Regatta and then into the round robins in the final, they're getting closer and closer, and I think that the match is going to be closer again still.
As a sail trimmer, I just throw this question to Paul Goodison and the so-called Wampa, this new sail's being christened. Paul, what's your assessment of that particular innovation from Team New Zealand?
I think it's a desperation sail. I think just looking at the performance of the boats, if you're up and foiling, you're going to finish within the time limit. As soon as you fall off the foils, it's going to be really hard to finish within the time limit. So I think kind of what they're banking on there is that the wind drops halfway through the race or towards the end of the race, and you're desperately trying to get to the finish. You saw quite closely in the Ineos race with Team New Zealand how the difference in the performance of the boats and displacement, and it obviously looks like that's one of their weaker areas, but it's something you don't expect, and I think they're just covering all the bases. By having that sail, I think it's an emergency. We just got to get to the finish. This is our only card left to play, and that's what they're going to play. I don't think we'll see it, but you never know.
So a risk management strategy, in other words.
Yeah, I think so. I think they identified a weakness. They've understood that this is a potential race winner, race loser, and it's something you put up, I think, when there's all the other options are gone.
Freddie, the output of the grinders is even more important in the light conditions. Can you firstly just explain what the role of the grinder is, and secondly, whether you think Team New Zealand or Luna Rossa with their setup have an edge?
Yeah, so everything below the water, the foils, is powered by the batteries, and everything above the water, the sails, fundamentally is powered by the grinders. Now, you would think in the light airs it would be easier to power these boats, but it's actually quite the opposite. To get these boats up and foiling, you need a very powerful sail setup, very deep sail setup we call it. So you ease everything off, and then very quickly you're up on the foil, and you want to flatten everything out. So fundamentally you're stretching all three corners of the sail away from each other once you're up and foiling. So once you're up on the foil, you've very quickly got to sheet everything on, stretch the sail out again, flatten out, make it more aerodynamic. You then go into attack, touch down again, ease all the sails off, and have to go through that whole process again. So the hardest work for the grinders is when you're on and off the foil and constantly having to take the sail shape from deep and powerful to flat and very aerodynamic. And looking at the grinding setup between the two teams, firstly I'd say they've both done a very good job of making their grinders, their power unit, part of the boat, very aerodynamic, particularly on the Team New Zealand boat. And what Luna Rossa do well is they are not constantly grinding. So somehow maybe they're slightly less dynamic in the Traveller and steering around the Traveller movement a bit more, but what that allows their grinders to do is to drop to their knees and to get out of the wind. Haven't seen sort of onboard stuff of Team New Zealand since before Christmas, so it'll be interesting to see where they're at, but they were sort of certainly more in our style of sailing pre-Christmas, where they're constantly kind of winding the whole time and maybe charging the accumulator to move the Traveller more.
Paul Goodison, we've heard from Freddie talk about the role of the grinders on board the boats. From a sail trimmer perspective, can you just explain that role, your role, and also whether you think that Glenn Ashby at Team New Zealand will have an advantage?
It's very interesting, the setups on both boats. You see Glenn sitting to leeward trimming the mainsail, and you see Pietro sat to windward trimming the mainsail. So both teams have gone very different about their approach, and there's definite strengths and definite weaknesses as one or the other. And I kind of like the sitting to windward because it's your natural position. It's how you see the wind coming onto the boat. But I think the way New Zealand have set up is that Glenn's more of a setup man. Glenn's setting the sails up for the optimum shapes, the optimum performance, whereas you see the helmsman, Peter, he's trimming the Traveller. So he's got a handle of both. So if they're down on oil pressure and you need to steer around a little bit more, he can control a little bit more what he wants to do. And Glenn's just really about focusing on the speed, the performance of the boat, and getting the maximum out of the boat. I think between the two setups, it's interesting how much changing around they're going to do with the sails. As Freddie mentioned earlier, it's all about the big, deep, powerful cambers to get the boat in the air and then flattening them off as fast as you can. And you see both teams don't have a boom, and both teams seem to be very efficient at going from these big cambers to the flatter cambers quite quickly. So I don't think we'll see much of a difference there. I think the bigger differences are going to be in the mast rotation. You look at the Italian boat and they have a locked mast rotation to the boat that moves independently, whereas you look at the New Zealand boat and they have something that we trialled quite a lot earlier on but didn't really have the success to make it work in the link system. So as the Traveller moves, the mast also moves as well, which has a really big gains in the shifty, unstable conditions. So I think that's going to be the key differences there.
Well, one of the things that we really learned from watching the Prada Cup finals, Freddie, was how important the pre-starts were, and we will expect a similar kind of pattern in this America's Cup, where getting off the line clean and hopefully with an advantage over your opponent is really important. And looking back on the pre-starts that you were involved with in the Prada Cup finals, it seemed to me that Jimmy Spithill and Francesco Bruni had a bit of a choreography that they followed, a pattern, especially if they had port entry. So how do you see that playing out? Do you expect to see anything different from them this time? What can Team New Zealand do to counter their standard move?
Yeah, you've picked up on it perfectly there, Mark. Like, they were very formulaic, and that's not a criticism, because it was very hard for Ben and Giles to break them down in the pre-start. The formula they had, particularly on a port entry start, meant that at worst they were going to get off the line even, and if they executed it really well, they'd come off the line better. So it was the emphasis, we felt the emphasis was quite often on us to try and disrupt the formula that they've come up with. Now, I'm sure Team New Zealand have seen the same, particularly Ray Davies, like a match racing legend who is for sure leading Pete on the pre-start side of things. There's a little bit of me that thinks Team New Zealand might be pretty happy with an even start. They don't have to go out and win the starts, because they might have a smidge more boat speed, but we'll see this time tomorrow. And I also go back to Bermuda. All the chat in Bermuda was how Spithill was going to knock young Burling out because he's not a match racer. And like, you go back to Bermuda and Team New Zealand led to Mark 1 more times than Oracle did. And I bet that's actually playing on Jimmy's mind a bit. And it might force him to come out swinging a bit. They might need to be the team that finds a few mix-ups in the pre-start to try and win. So I think the pre-starts will be fascinating for sure. And we'll see come race 1.
Have the Italians been underrated?
I think that what you've seen from the Italians is an incredible performance gain. They've slowly increased their performance at every stage, from the Christmas Cup through to the round robins, through to the semi-finals, through to the finals. And it's going to be interesting to see when that development stops. Like, at some point you're going to maximise the performance of the boat, and you're going to run out of new goodies to come on board. But what we've seen is the Kiwi boat is very fast. You look back at the data from pre-Christmas, I think it was only at the end of the semi-finals that boats were getting close to what the Kiwis were performing before Christmas. Since then, they've had new foils, they've had new developments. So in my mind, I think they're still going to have an edge. I think the Kiwi boat's still going to be slightly faster, but in the lighter conditions, which is a real strength of the Italians, who knows? I think it's going to be really close racing in these lighter conditions.
Marco Maxarena pointed out that, such a new class, they've only had 16 races in this boat, so they're still developing. But let's quickly look at the afterguard. Jimmy Spithill, he's a sailor that we love to talk about a lot in New Zealand. What are the strengths of that Italian afterguard?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Max Sereno's sort of making the point they've only had 16 races. Of course, Team New Zealand have had a lot less than that. So they've got an advantage in terms of race practice and preparation. And that will be the biggest advantage for them, is that it doesn't matter how much work you do in the simulator or how much practice you do against a chase boat. It's not the same as coming up against a real opponent where you don't know what they're going to do. And you've got also the rules that come into play as well. So the big advantage that Jimmy Spithill has, because he is the helmsman from the starboard side, and that's the tack that you approach in the last 45 seconds to a minute to the start, is that he's very familiar now with pre-starts. He's done more of them than Peter Burling has by a long shot. And his personality is such that he is very comfortable to really take an opponent on. And Peter's personality, on the other hand, is different. Peter is much more of an intuitive boat speed kind of sailor. He's not a naturally aggressive kind of personality, so he doesn't relish the fight, even though he's fine with that competitive aspect of the sport. But Jimmy does. So Jimmy's going to be looking for the battle, and he will be really relishing that opportunity. Pete, on the other hand, just wants to sail the boat fast.
Right, it's prediction time, fellas. Let's start with you, Freddie Carr. Who wins, why, and what's your scoreline?
Who wins? I think it's very forecast dependent. I think Team New Zealand have a faster boat in over 11 knots. I'm going to hang it out there and say Luna Rossa maybe have a faster boat under 11. For the sake of good sport, let's hope so. I think Team New Zealand win on that. I think the pre-starts will be fascinating. I think it's going to be 7-3, 7-4, something like that.
Goody, your predictions?
It's a no-brainer. The red and black boat's going to win.
That's a cop-out, mate.
No, I think as Freddie said, the pre-starts are going to be critical. We see the forecast for these first couple of days have been quite light. And what we haven't mentioned yet is how forgiving the Luna Rossa boat is in the pre-starts. It has the bigger foils. It has a really forgiving hull for takeoffs. And what they did really well in the semi-finals and the finals, that they can manipulate and massage the time to the start in that last 30, 40 seconds, because they have the ability to go slower than the other boats on the foils, and they have the ability to accelerate in the really light winds. So I think almost the first couple of days, it's going to be a big advantage to those guys in the pre-starts. But at the end of the day, it's all down to boat speed. So as long as you can get off the line equal or very similar, you have a chance. But hanging out there, I think it's going to be, it's hard to see anything other than the Kiwis winning, just from a sheer performance side. I think if they start well, they're going to be really difficult to beat. But who knows? So I think, 7-3, 7-4.
AUT sailing professor Marco Orams.
Well, the first thing I'd say, Matt, is that these sort of speculations and predictions are, and most of them, almost all that I've heard, are in favour of Team New Zealand. They're not a sign of disrespect against Luna Rossa, Prada, Pirelli, or any of their team members. What they have achieved has been remarkable, and they are a team of sailors and designers and boat builders and all the other people involved with it. That are absolutely respected by everybody I know in the New Zealand sailing community and those who are visiting here as well. So just wanted to start off by saying that. But the pattern of the America's Cup is it is a boat speed contest in the end, because at this level the quality of sailors is such that even though the odd mistake gets made, for the most part they are able to execute at a very high level, as it should be at this level of sport. And so the faster boat will eventually prevail. For me, I think the best chance Luna Rossa has is early in the series, when Team New Zealand will have a bit of race rust. So if Luna Rossa can get on top early and get their confidence up, if they can start to put a little bit of self-doubt into the Kiwis' mind, that's their best chance. But in the end, I think that Te Rahutai is just going to be too quick and that they'll eventually prevail.
Well, racing in the 36th America's Cup starts Wednesday. There are 2 races. There's a lay day on Thursday, but then from Friday, it's 2 races each day until one team has that magical 7 wins. You can catch all the live radio commentary with official broadcast partners News Talk ZB, Gold AM and streaming on iHeartRadio. Calling all of the action is PJ Montgomery, the voice of sailing, with expert comments from Chris Steele. Well, it's a big thanks to Freddie Carr from Ineos Team UK, Paul Goodison from American Magic. Let's hope it is close racing and we get to see a fantastic America's Cup match over the next week. And Marco Orams, AUT sailing professor, of course, we can read all your blogs on nzherald.co.nz over the next week or so in the America's Cup match. On behalf of our team here at the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron, this has been your America's Cup show, Beyond the Cup.